My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow the Noble Lady Black of Strome with her extremely powerful and obviously absolutely expert speech. And I think the point the Noble Lady made about the chance of global leadership here is something that I'm going to come back to. I want to thank the Noble Lord, Lord Boateng, for securing this debate and apologise for missing the first few seconds of his speech. I am going to get my printer sorted out one day. I think I have to say it is disappointing that we have so few speakers in this debate. In the main chamber now, they have just finished a debate on the UK's global position, and I had to drop out of that to be able to take part in this debate. But what we are debating here is not just as important as it is a moral issue or a legal issue. It's also one of major importance to the UK's standing and place in the world. The way in which we are regarded by particularly significant parts of the world that it is crucial to work with to defend human rights and the rule of law, when major global players are seeking instead to impose the rule of might and the cynical interests of corporations over the well-being of the human and more than human world. Now, I feel it's important to declare my own position here. I come from a white settler background in Australia, and I grew up on unceded land that was stolen from the Aboriginal people. Now, my speech is going to focus particularly on public ownership of human remains. I think the Noble Lady Baroness Black has already covered the private ownership very well. And in acknowledging my Australian origins, I'm going to begin with a single tale. It's just one tale, and there are many, many more, of the genocide with which white settlers established themselves on the Australian continent. It's a story of one man and of barbarous settler behaviour. On the land of the Bunuba people in what is now Western Australia, Jandamarra became a famous leader of the Indigenous resistance. For 3 years he was hunted by settlers and police until in 1897, when he was aged about 24, he was cornered by the police, shot, killed, and his body was beheaded. His skull was sent as a colonial trophy to a private museum in a gun factory in Birmingham. The factory was demolished in the 1960s, and Jandamarra's skull has disappeared. Bunuba elders and researchers continue to this day to search for that skull. Now, his story is very important to Indigenous people, other people also in Australia. It was first put on stage as a play at the 2008 Perth International Arts Festival, and more recently was staged with the Bunuba people by the Sydney Symphony Orchestra in Sydney. So that is my telling of an Indigenous story. But I also want to put on the record the words of another Indigenous leader from another continent and another coloniser, the words of Manaka Sura Maburo, who, speaking for his ancestors in Berlin last year, opened a symposium on colonial human remains with these words. He's speaking for his ancestors. Free us from the museums. Free us from the basements where they spray us now and then with disinfectant. Free us from the universities, from the clinics where they keep us on the shelves with the skulls of monkeys, gorillas and orangutans. Free us from the depots where we cannot breathe. Bring us home and rest us in peace forever." End quote. He told, too, at the conference where those words were said, a story told to him by his grandmother about one acacia tree, where she, with hundreds of others, was forced in 1900 to witness the hangings of 19 regional leaders, among them Mangi Meli. He was regarded as the most senior, so the last to die. After he was hanged, the Germans chopped off Mangi Meli's head and took it for their colonial collections. There is no record of it after that. Two different colonised nations, two different awful colonial powers, two remarkably similar stories. Now, I think there's a huge issue there which has already been well covered by Lord Boateng. And the Noble Lord focused this debate on remains such as those of Indigenous peoples. And I note that the All-Party Parliamentary Group for African Reparations has said that it should become an offence to sell ancestral remains or put them on public display without consent. I think the Noble Lord Boateng set out some other legal steps that should also be taken forward. The APPG says rightly this would be a modest form of reparation for past wrongs, the kind of wrongs that I was telling the tale of, together with the return, whenever it is possible, for the remains with appropriate treatment by the communities from which they were taken. But rightly too, the APPG points to the issue of Egyptian mummies. Now we might think, perhaps we might have thought until we heard the Noble Lady Black's speech, that we've made some progress since the days when mummies were ground up for medicines, or even to colour paint. There was a paint called Mummy Brown, a colour. It was made from the flesh of mummies mixed with white pitch and myrrh from the mid-18th century into the 20th century. And I note, and it is worth noting, that the Chow Chak Wing Museum at the University of Sydney, and I should perhaps declare an interest as one of my former sites of study, last year decided to remove fragments of mummies from public display and has also been seeking to rename its so-called mummy room to something more respectful. They removed a mummified foot that had been donated in an old biscuit tin, the preserved feet and partial shins of a child, a partially bandaged adult head, and a mummified hand that had been donated in a separate biscuit tin. Now, as the curator there said, the ancient Egyptians are not around as are peoples today to object to this disrespectful treatment. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look more broadly than just those remains for whom there are identifiable peoples that are still able to speak for them, as the voice I quoted from Berlin. It's not just those remains, it's all remains that we should be thinking about. And as I started off by saying, this is a geopolitical issue. It is an issue of reparations. But most foundationally of all, it's an issue about what kind of society we want to be. It's not about the remains at all, it's about us and what we are like. If we're going to be respectful of human life of the past, the present and the future, what is in our museums, what our children visit and view, what our scholars study, how they are presented with the past, that has an impact on the nature of our society today. We often hear talk about being world-leading. If we were to take steps outlined by the Noble Lord Boateng and the Noble Lady Baroness Black, we would be world-leading, and we'd also be taking steps to improve our own society.